AskReddit by ZipZap21. Poor people who have dated rich people, what did you learn? They don't really have a concept of how rich they are. My ex-boyfriend was wealthy, but had a complex about how he was super poor. It was because all of his friends were also so wealthy, and he was maybe marginally less rich than some of them. He considered himself on the lower end of the scale. They don't really have a point of reference for how poor some people are. When we were together I was living on a food budget of £50 a month, and he absolutely could not wrap his head around how a person could spend that little. I lived with a horrendously rich friend. His family are aristocracy in his home country. One thing I've noticed about him is that he's completely incapable of grasping that if I stop working, I just stop being able to eat. He was confused about why I was worried about taking a week off work, and didn't understand I was worried I'd lose money. He seemed to think that most people work because they choose to, because he's never had to work. I have a friend like this who is insanely rich. Would always say, I grew up in the poorest part of Beverly Hills. My ex was having problems with roommates at university. Her parents bought a $300,000 condo for her to stay at while she finished her degree, 2 years. They sold it for a profit immediately after. I can't imagine not only being able to solve my problems with money, let alone make more off of them. She also assumed her family was lower middle class because she didn't live in a mansion like her friends. She was very humble and was smart with her money, but it was very clear she could just call her parents if something didn't work out. Meanwhile my parents were struggling to pay rent, meaning I was their fallback. Not the other way around. Not a dating story, but it was eye-opening when I went to uni in the UK and some of the rich students bought their flats in Edinburgh just for their studies. One of these rich students was an amazingly sweet person, and since I couldn't afford to fly home for Christmas, she took me with her to her family's compound in Morocco, where they literally had servants that followed them around carrying silver platters of tea all day. Dated a man who didn't work, lived off of a trust fund. Oddly, since he could afford nearly anything, nothing had any value. He'd buy a $400 KitchenAid mixer and burn it up making Christmas candy the first week. If he decided to make more candy, he'd just go buy another $400 mixer. Nothing meant particularly anything to him. I'm just impressed someone broke a KitchenAid. I'm pretty sure that thing would win a fight vs my house's foundation. Edit. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on this brand of stand mixer. The one I bought for my household is a tank and has served us well since we got it. I was just trying to make a joke. I really don't care if they use plastic gears and not metal now, or if some other brand is even better. I only went on one date with him. He booked out the entire bowling alley so we'd have privacy for our date. It just seemed so shockingly wasteful to me, and it was bizarre to have a 20-lane bowling alley just to the two of us plus a fair-sized staff who were left with nothing to do but look after us. I learned I'm very uncomfortable with that level of casual assumption that the world will rearrange itself to suit my whims. Also, he had absolutely no respect for personal space. I don't think he was used to women not liking to be touched by folks they barely knew. I prefer the sounds of a bowling alley when bowling, otherwise it feels like a horror movie where I'm the first person to die at the opening scene. Deleted. I once had a rich co-worker find out I was pretty broke. I was working at a very fancy retreat as a student, so was surrounded by rich people working for fun. He told me to just buy a 3-bedroom house, live in one of the rooms and rent out the other 2. Just buy a house. My wife's family has no concept of what a workday is. To never have to open workday again? Now that's the dream. Trademark sign. How real the network or bubble of it is. It's like the other side from the "it's expensive being poor" concept. It's this weird internal community of people with money, and thus power, who are willing to make things happen as long as you're in. I mean, I would meet people at a fundraiser or something and 5 minutes later, they're happy to make a call that will get me a job at some huge firm. Or like, my then boyfriend would say, let's go this concert. Tickets are $180, but it's okay, but a friend's parents have a box, so we'll just join them. Or even one time the dishwasher in our flat broke, but we didn't have to pay a dime for repairs because his friend from high school's parents owned the building, so they're fixing it for free as a favor. Yep. Even having rich friends makes a difference, giving you access to that special network. I've thought about this a lot as someone who grew up poor, but has been in a number of relationships with women from upper or upper middle class castes. I think what it boils down to is that they have a kind of certainty in the idea that things will work out for them that I don't. Growing up, it felt like we were always at the precipice of catastrophe. I always felt that one wrong move would result in us losing our house or all of our money. As such, I kept immaculate care of things that I bought, knowing that I could not replace any of it if it were gone. The women I've been in relationships with, though, seem to have none of this fear. They always assume that things will work out. Plans don't need to be made because there's always some way to solve the problem with money. Objects don't get much respect because they are always readily replaceable. I always think about Nick Carraway. Nice Gatsby reference. It fits beautifully. Dated a girl for 3 years who came from old money. She was fine, but her family was beyond out of touch with the real world. They were nice people but incredibly removed from the rest of the world. They looked at me like I was too animal in the sense that they were so curious about my life family. They'd ask me what it was like going to public school, how my parents immigrated. They were baffled that not everyone had vacation homes or traveled a lot. The most interesting thing is that old money is much more powerful than new money. They belonged to these clubs that consists of other rich families, and the influence they had was mind-blowing. Want to build a factory in an area not zoned for it? Within a week that was changed. Damn. Classism even exists between rich people. I learned just how productive having money can be. Something needs to be fixed, replaced. We can afford to. Want to do something fun or adventurous? Sure, let's do it now. Want to eat healthier? We can afford all the ingredients. Like, what do you mean your life isn't slowed down by a million different things that need fixing, upgrading, replacing, saved for? Deleted. They don't know how to cut back because they only knew the good life. No, sweetheart, we don't need 3 vacations a year when you are fucking unemployed. I see some of them have traveled the whole world when they are only 24. Not graduated college. Yeah, we all know where that comes from, lol. He didn't have any concept of saving money. It was always just there because his money was always earning money. Having money was an income stream of itself. Also, he had no concept of how much anything cost. Was going to get some groceries for dinner and he gave me $300 to pick up some basics. Here's $100. Go see a Star Wars. If you have a lot of money, people give you so much free stuff all the time trying to earn your business or procure donations. Ironic that the people who can best afford to pay for the items get canned the most. Deleted. Grew up poor, now middle class, and at 18 dated a super rich guy. First thing I noticed was the food. Not just quantities, but I also discovered so much food, like oyster, fresh fish, olives, things my parents could never buy. I also had to learn etiquette. My parents brought me up well. I read books all the time, was a decent student and well-behaved kid, but the way his family interacted was so different. I had to learn a lot of unwritten rules that I wasn't aware of. I think in the end what I actually learned was that even though my childhood was rough, the amount of stress of not having enough money has probably impacted me for life. I valued my parents so much more. Once I had seen what life was like for rich people, I was just so proud of my family for making it work with so much less. Deleted. Quality really does make a difference in everything from clothing to ingredients. I grew up poorish, had stable shelter and clean, used clothes, but anything else was a struggle. I had a friend in college whose dad was a VP at a major box store. They were doing alright. The first time I went to her house, She suggested having a sandwich to hold us off until dinner time. Her regular snack was prosciutto and arugula on ciabatta with a finishing drizzle of balsamic vinegar. I had only seen those words in a fancy cookbook. Edit. For all of you who needed to say that that's not fancy, then I'm glad you've had a different life with more early opportunities than I did. It was fancy to 18-year-old me, whose idea of a ham sandwich was Carl Buddig on store brand bread. Well, I wasn't that poor, and she wasn't that rich, but it was enough of a difference that I was shocked at how often she just took planes. Like, she flew more in a summer than I had my whole life. That and apparently they go to Hawaii for a week every year, which was fun the time I got to tag along. But it's pretty wild to me that they can just do that. Even if I could afford it, I don't have enough vacation time to do that every year. I flew for the first time ever when I was 36. And it was for work, so I didn't have to pay. Felt like an idiot trying to navigate multiple airports during my layovers. And no, I didn't clap when we landed, but during takeoff I had a huge grin on my face. I'm a guy who has dated women considerably wealthier than myself. My experience is that money becomes a factor sooner or later, no matter how closely you've connected on every other level. Even when the lady in question seems cool with it, there can be arch looks and withering comments from friends and family in social settings about what you've just ordered for dinner, or what your holiday plans are. In those relationships I've ended up being made to feel like a bottleneck. I'm either the person who the woman spends money on more than vice versa, or the person whose income puts more restraint on evenly shared expenditure than would otherwise be the case. In either scenario, there's pressure, and even if the woman seems fine with it, there are people around her who no doubt would claim they're just looking out for her, who will cheerfully flag every instance where the difference in income is apparent. Money doesn't have to warp people, but it seems it often does, whether it's actually their own money or not. Something I did not see here is how the comfortably rich view the truly rich. At one time I was director of a Fortune 100 department and my boss was the VP. He was wealthy enough to have his own yacht and to belong to a big name yacht club. One evening he and his wife hosted me and my wife at that club for a dinner. Great dinner. We were amused to hear him complain during dinner of all the things he could not do along with his wealthier club friends, like, for example, drop everything on the spur of the moment to fly to South Africa for a yacht race, as a spectator, not a racer. He was genuinely put out by this awful dose of reality. We commiserated appropriately. But we did get several pleasant trips on his yacht over the years. So, it's nice to know the merely average wealthy from time to time. Went to an old school yacht club in Charleston. I was kind of surprised. Those people are just fucking sailors. Skin like leather, nothing really that fancy. I'm sure they all have crazy money, but I was kind of impressed with how this place was just really a sorts club for wannabe pirates. Wife's family comes from money and I come from broke AF. There's probably a new that's weird, why would you do that every week? This will appear for things like forgetting hamburger buns and giving the kids a burger on Wonder Bread, or whipping up a batch of spaghetti noodles to go with chili. Growing up my mom would make spaghetti one night, then call the leftover sauce chili for the next night. The only thing Italian about the spaghetti was the garlic, and the only thing chili about it was the Texas Pete we threw in it the next night. Still loved it though and do it to this day. My ex's father was rich. My ex himself was not rich, did not understand the value of money, and was a spoiled dusthole who got a great job at a great company full of awesome people and then proceeded to steal from them. He would bitch at me for buying food for the apartment and then come home with $200 worth of stupid shit he got talked into buying at the mall. When his windshield got cracked he bought a new car. He was the single most incompetent and entitled person I've ever known. But he firmly believed he was the smartest person in any room he entered. None of his friends talked to him anymore because he either stole from or alienated all of them. On the upside, somebody probably got a nice deal on a decent car because the windshield cracked. Rich people seem to eat a lot of fish. just made me realize how expensive being poor is. They never have debt, never need to look at their balance to see if they can buy food, never pay interest on overdue bills, etc. Oh, the really rich have a ton of debt. But they have so much money and assets that they borrow that money for peanuts. Their actual cash is invested in ways that makes them much more money than their debts costs them. Want to buy a $5 million house? Borrow $5 million and the interests on your $100 million in assets will cover the loan easily. Rich doesn't cure alcoholism. Addiction is a bitch. Having money to spend means you have resources to go to therapy or other services, sure, but that's not what an addicted brain is going to spend the money on. Not worrying about finances, it's hard to resist the temptation to waltz down to the liquor store. Hell, you can even make a second trip later, you can afford it. Honestly, the times that I improved my condition the most were the times I had negative bank balance and a bag of rice to last 2 weeks. I can't trust my brain to not make bad decisions when they're available to me. An acquaintance, actually the aunt of the spouse of a family member of mine, worked as a maid while putting herself through school to a super wealthy and famous family in a foreign country. They had it all. They spent like no tomorrow, just assuming it would always be there. The granddad was a businessman and I guess was most well known as the owner of a sports team. This aunt acquaintance was basically told to keep her opinions to herself and just do the work. So she mostly did. She knew everything about that family. One of the grown adult grandkids like didn't work. He just lived off the family. His pastime was napping. She was told to keep some of the cleaning noise down when he was napping. Anyways, I'm not sure what happened, but the whole thing completely unraveled when the patriarch passed away, and I guess there were a bunch of debts he had been just shifting money around to keep at bay. When things went south, she bought furniture off them for pennies on the dollar and furnished her new place real nice. I guess the kids were able to keep their trust funds or something, but they lost all the real estate and fancy amenities. Anyways, the bottom line is that she rents out a studio apartment to that guy who just likes to sleep. Looks like he's just running down his trust fund. She feels bad for the guy, can't convince him to get a job. That was a wild ride. Dated this wealthy girl who instantly had an anxiety attack when I told her I was thinking about buying my own car. She believed I'd break up with her because I won't need her car anymore. Make your own conclusions. You'll miss the lake house more than them. Mine's a bit on the positive side, I guess. I grew up dirt poor and I guess got to a point where I couldn't dream big. My family is still poor. I dated a guy who not only was a trust fund baby but he also had a job as chief engineer and was making over $250k a year from that job. He didn't need the money. I was making $70k. He'd organize spontaneous holidays, overseas and fun weekend activities that cost money. Told me to leave my card at home. Then in the short time we dated, he coached me into how to get a better paying job. Helped me learn and understand my worth and the value of my education and experience. While dating him I quit my $70k job and landed a $100k one. Then broke into the $200k a few years later. Now I have money and can take my parents and siblings on holiday as well as put my siblings through university and help them out. Share the coaching, girl, don't be shy. Spent first 8 years of my adult life with a woman whose parents had money. She had no conception of how hard life could be if you couldn't just sell stocks to buy a new car, or have someone give you a couple thousand to put you up in a new place. She pocketed her paycheck every 2 weeks. When we went out, I paid for gas. I bought dinner. Didn't think much about it at the time because we were engaged. When we broke up, she had $30k in her savings account and I was broke. Growing up with money is like hitting every green light and not having to worry about traffic jams. And it really fucks with your ability to empathize with people. My favorite expression is born on third base. but think they hit a triple. I went out with a girl briefly years ago, and her parents had a good amount of money. I grew up in a small cottage, where we shared rooms and my parents slept in our living room. This girl's place? They had a private sauna, and her brother was given a curved smart TV, must have been like a 50 inches plus, multiple new gaming systems, all tuition paid for, university etc. And here I am buying that, and having my student loans all to myself. I think I learned is people take it for granted sometimes what they have, while others value the basics. Not dated, but I grew up firmly middle class in a very rich area, so most of my high school friends were from rich families. What I found was that rich people can be weirdly stingy with money when it comes to certain things and just not care for other things.